how many of you are between the ages 31 and 50? And how many of you are over the age of 50? Oh, I knew that would get your attention. The future is... Am I here? Okay. As we just learned from the last session, the future of our industry is an incredibly complicated one. So many challenges, technological challenges, aviation challenges, sustainability challenges, demographic challenges, the list goes on. And I'm sure that it's probably not all that different from 60 years ago when that group of people was sitting in Hawaii and came up with the epiphany of having an organization that eventually became known as the Pacific Asia Travel Association. Their vision, 60 years ago, resulted in great success. PATA has done so many incredible things, as we saw yesterday during the video, and as we saw during the opening ceremony. Myself, I've been involved in PATA for a long time, and as I look around the room, I see that there's also people that have even been involved in PATA for longer than I have. The thing is, here's the big question. How are we going to do the same thing that the founders of PATA did 60 years ago at this moment? This is the crossroad. This is the future. We have to sit here and we have to come up with the game changer. Because if we don't, PATA will dissolve off into the sunset, and that will be the end. And everybody in this room, along with the panelists, and anybody that's involved in Asia-Pacific travel and tourism, will be responsible for that demise. So today's session is really about looking at the future, taking all of the stuff that's going to happen in, and then really looking at a little bit at ourselves and saying, what are we going to do with this association? Are we just talking a lot and not doing anything? Are we being NATO, no action, talk only? Or are we going to be after? Action first, talk after. It's a big question. We've talked at a board meeting this past weekend. We've talked here. I've talked to people in the hallways. I've challenged our panelists to be very frank about the future and to really look at the heart and soul of this organization and see how that we can be compatible with the future. Now, to paint a picture of where we're going to go with this future, or what this future is, what we've done is that we've invited Geoffrey Lipman, who really doesn't need any introduction. He is the mouthpiece not only of Asia-Pacific travel and tourism, but of global tourism. And the good professor, I call him. The good professor, we sort of challenged him with a couple of things. Geoffrey, there's intense challenges now and into the future. What are they? How are we going to deal with them? Geoffrey, there's a new generation of innovators. There's people that do things incredibly differently than we did them 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago. What are those innovators all about? Geoffrey, the education system that we have now that is supposed to support hospitality and tourism, is it old school? Is it in line with the current operating environment and the future operating environment? Geoffrey, what do we do with this highly mobile workforce that is coming about? And finally, are we an industry that's steeped in tradition and unable to adapt to the change that is going on? So without any further ado, I'd like to invite Geoffrey to come up and share with us wonderful insight. Welcome, Geoffrey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And really thank you for leaving me with that huge void to fill, which you didn't actually warn me about before I came up here. First of all, I want to say how happy I am to be back at PATA and to congratulate PATA on its anniversary. I have 9 slides today and I have 10 to 15 minutes to keep your interest. I have no speech. I intend to just talk to try to respond to the questions that Peter has raised. And this is the first point that I want to make. This is a concept which came to me from my children when I hit my 50th birthday. And they gave me a little thing to put on the fridge, one of those stickers. And it actually said, "You are not 50, it said. This says you are 20 with 40 years of experience." And I think that is one very important point. Everybody is rejuvenating. Every institution is rejuvenating. And PATA in that sense is no different from any other institution. I actually think I might touch like a wall. PATA is no different from any other institution. It's just that you're at a certain stage in the cycle. And every organization, I've been in 3 international organizations, in IATA, in WTTC for its first 10 years, and then in WTO for the last 10 years. And everyone has had this cyclical, challenging, who are we, where are we going, will we be there? And what I hope to do in the next 10 minutes or so is to try to answer Peter's questions by saying I believe there is a huge role for PATA. It's very much in one of your traditional fields, which is the education field. But actually, and what I want to leave you with the impression is that we've actually got the concept of education wrong. And education means policy. One of the biggest challenges that we have had over the last 20 years that I've been involved in running around the world saying this is the world's largest industry is that the policymakers have no idea what you're talking about. Because it's taken us 20 years to try to understand what we ourselves are talking about. And if we can break that cycle and start to get into the education system, travel and tourism at an early stage, when we go to policymakers, as WTTC and UNWTO are doing at the moment, they won't have to explain all the background because they'll know its importance as much as anything else. And that's what I want to talk about today. In the last 40 years, we've seen, this is a UNWTO chart, it could be a PATA chart, and you can see one of the massive issues is the, I won't tell you how to suck eggs, it's the growth of this region and the continuing growth of this region, so it will be the most dynamic, the centre of tourism, inbound, outbound, globally, in the next 50 years. Now here's the second slide. This is China. When I first came to China 30 years ago, there were no cars, there were bicycles, difficult to tell the men from the women, they were all in Mao suits. This is China's contribution at the Olympics, and you can see it everywhere. And China is symptomatic of the change that has taken place in the Asia-Pacific region. It's not just China, it's India. I see India down there. It's India. It's Indonesia. This is where the growth is. Now here's something else that's happened. The guy on the right, this is the first computer. In 1958, Thomas Watson, the chairman of IBM, said there could only possibly ever be 5 computers. And then there's Bill Gates, and then there's the iPhone. 15 years ago, there was no internet. And then there's this is a different one. The thing in the middle is a black swan. If you haven't read the book by Taleb on the black swan, you should read it. It's all about events coming together, good or bad, mostly bad, which you don't think are going to happen, so your straight line forecast can't take account of them. And there you've got the Japanese tsunami, you've got earthquakes, you've got riots across the Middle East and North Africa, and you've got an uncertain nuclear future. 6 months ago, you didn't have that story. So how can you really make great forecasts and say we're going to stick with the forecast? What there has been during this period is what I'll call a paradigm shift. Between 1950 and 2000, we all learned about the triple bottom line: economic, social, and environmental balance. And the tourism product that we have was what I would call classic tourism. Grow it, market it, promote it, and then somewhere say, hey, we should make this sustainable. And I think we're heading for a new model. And that new model is the quadruple bottom line. Climate is not a subset of these three items. Climate trumps everything, because if we don't fix the climate issue, and I've been saying this for some time, and stabilize at no more than 2 degrees by 2050, all of our futures end. Or they change so dramatically we can't see them. And on the bottom side, the kind of tourism that we want for the future, and everybody agrees with, it's got to be carbon clean, environmentally green, ethical and inclusionary, and it has to be quality at every level of the value chain. And you can give it any label you like. People will say it's ecotourism, it's pro-poor tourism, it's sustainable tourism, it's responsible tourism. You should feel guilty when you travel. Claptrap. That's a claptrap. You don't have to feel guilty when you travel. You should celebrate traveling. You should just make sure you do it in a reasonable fashion and you take care of the people who you visit. This is a paradigm shift. Here's another paradigm shift. When I started at WTTC and we started to talk about travel and tourism in 1990, people didn't know why we were doing it. Part of it was because tourism's in its own silo. Part of it's because when you talk to people and say tourism, they only think about leisure. Part of it's because the airlines only want to do their thing, the hotels only want to do their thing. And underneath it, there's this vast reality of what is travel and tourism. And this is a complicated slide, but I'll leave it for a second because it's all these elements that we know about. I call it travelism because that way you capture everything. 80% of it is domestic. 80% of it is small and medium enterprises. And it's a 5% maximum carbon footprint. So if anybody was in the previous session, we should be fighting against the people who say you're the problem. We're a tiny part of the problem. We just haven't organized ourselves properly. And it's all these other things. It's trade, investment, development, jobs, jobs, jobs. And it's infrastructure. And it's one thing that you don't get if you manufacture tables or cars or midgets. We give understanding between people. There is no other sector which is doing that. In a world where understanding between people is preciously needed. Now, this is the future. This is a complicated chart. I don't do simple charts. In the corner, I was asked to speak about the big issues. These are the big issues that heads of state worry about. Economy, climate, poverty. And underneath are the issues that they will worry about. People, food, water. These are the challenges for the next 50 years, and there'll be more, but these are the big ones. And the challenge is how to get now to 2050 from here, deal with the Millennium Development Goals in 2015, keep on track with the carbon goals for 2020, and stabilize the Earth's temperature. And that map is a mosaic. Because it's a mosaic, because it's going to be built like a mosaic. There's no magic answer. There's no silver bullet. Every place is different. Everyone has different social, economic, ethnic, religious, cultural, and climate starting points. But by 2050, we've all got to get to what Thomas Friedman has described. I put it in a triangle. More clean energy from heaven, less dirty energy from hell, black energy, coal and oil. The use of information technology and energy technology to handle millions of transactions, billions and zillions of transactions every second of every day. And social inclusion so the poorest don't leave everything and start to fight with the richest who take everything. And on the bottom, biodiversity conservation. This is the future. This is what tourism has to look like in the future. This is not eco-tourism or responsible tourism. This is all transport has to be green. All hospitality has to be green. All intermediaries have to be green. All jobs have to be green. And every passenger has to be thinking in green terms. Now, that's not tomorrow, that's 2050, but we have to incrementally get there, and you have to have that thinking in mind, because everything will change. Products, markets, consumers, supply chain, all that will change. And to talk about it in small pieces makes no sense. What we're talking about is sustainable mobility, meeting sustainable destinations with sustainable lifestyles from the people who are traveling and the people who are visiting. And by the way, there's a huge prize in this. There are trillions of dollars that are going to be given by governments. Let me just go back again. Trillions of dollars going to be given by governments for people who adapt, mitigate, use technology. This is a massive opportunity. And the great thing about our sector is we can do it because we are not a big polluter. We don't have a serious problem. But Richard Quest is right. We have not grasped the nettle of this issue. We haven't stood up and started to fight that small group of academics and media people who are saying the industry is the problem. The industry is the solution. We just have to change the way we think and change the way we do things. And that leads me to my last point. Education is where it's all at. If we just had a 40-year cycle that I've tried to capture in about 7 minutes, which 40-year cycle we've spent trying to say, we are here, travel and tourism is a serious industry, take us seriously, put us in your policy making. As I said at the beginning, one of the reasons why we haven't succeeded is because the people we're talking to is my generation. And we didn't even know what travel and tourism was. In our schools, in our secondary schools, our universities, our tertiary system, in our vocational schools. We've done bits of it. I was talking to Chuck G before. Arts has done some great things. University of Hawaii, George Washington. Individual countries have got streams of education. Show me a coherent strategy, Marcia. We haven't got a coherent strategy in UNWTO. WTTC, we had an educational institute in the 90s, they scrapped it in 2000. Nobody's trying to see how we can take education and make it a fundamental issue. So we need to rethink what we've been doing. We need to refocus. We don't have to hit the whole spectrum. We have to get a coherent set of messages. We have to make them relevant to every culture and every language. And we have to put them in the primary schools, the universities, the tertiary schools, the business schools. And with that, and every institution can do it together. This is a world of collaborative networking. This isn't WTTC, part of WTO, IATA. This is everybody linking up. And what we need is a green growth and travelism network. And share. Don't hog everything. Don't say this is mine, not yours. I tell you one last story before I finish, please, because I know time's up. But when, in the 90s, when I came to one of the first meetings when I was president of WTTC, one of my first meetings, I came to a PATA meeting in Bali. I'm sure many of you were there. And we had the first big environment debate. And I came across, I was president of a world organization, all the big players. And I had a strategy, and we did reasonable stuff in those days in WTTC. I had a strategy of papers and buzzwords and numbers. Nobody believed the numbers, but we had numbers. And I put them all up, and a 16-year-old kid called Danny Kennedy wiped the floor with all of us on the panel. Some of you may remember it. Ian Kennedy's son, because he got the message and he really understood what has to be done. So I think we need to go back to the education. Make it central. Don't make it just an afterthought. Every institution has education on its agenda. None of them allocate money, time, resources. It's always the last item, and it's always vocational stuff. So this is my last point. Some of you may know Maurice Strong. He's the guy who started the environment movement worldwide. He's the guy who chaired the Rio Earth Summit, and for some reason or other, for 20 years, we have been very good friends. Maurice is starting a World Environment University in Jeju Island in 2012 in the Republic of South Korea. And he's asked some of his friends to put pieces in place. And I'm putting in place with him a Green Growth and Travelism network. This is in the heart of Partaland. Parta should get with us in this, as should the other institutions. And my last point here is a plea for you to do just that. I want to finish by again saying happy birthday to Parta. And this time I want to say you are 60, but you have 40 years of opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey. Thank you. It's actually quite amazing if you think about it. 60 years ago, nobody knew about travel and tourism. It was this sort of emerging industry that nobody had any idea about. And very clearly, as Geoffrey says, everybody knows what it's about now, but the challenges have refocused. There's different sorts of challenges. We have a very, very interesting group of panelists that are going to join us today. We have a group of life members of PATA. We have a group of people that are currently very active in the industry, not to say that life members are not active in the industry. And of course we have our winner of tomorrow's tourism competition, Fiona, who was with us yesterday. I would first like to introduce our life members. I would like to start with Brian Deason. Brian Deason is a well-known tourism hotelier entrepreneur, has had great success, and I'm sure is going to be able to contribute a lot to the discussion this morning. Welcome, Brian. I'd also like to invite Chuck G. Chuck G is probably one of the most renowned tourism educators in the region, has been doing it for a long time. Welcome, Chuck. Another very distinguished tourism entrepreneur, Tunku Iskander, who is also a life member and has been very active with PATA for at least 20 years. Andrew Chan is very active in the industry right now. He's one of the top recruiters in Asia Pacific, dealing with getting people jobs, and he really has an idea of the heartbeat of what people that are in the industry now are looking for. Welcome, Andrew. And Chris Flynn probably doesn't need introduction. Everybody knows Chris. He's the regional director for the Pacific of PATA. Welcome, Chris. And last, but for sure not least, the winner of yesterday's Tomorrow's Tourism Competition, Fiona, who is from Macau and is a new entrant both in PATA and in the hospitality and tourism industry. Welcome, Fiona. So we have a pretty big task today. We basically need to look at the future, and we need to determine ways in which PATA can engage in this future. And I think probably the best way to start is, Fiona, why in the world would you get involved in the hospitality and tourism industry? You could have been a lawyer or a doctor or done a lot of other interesting things. Why tourism?
I wish I could be a lawyer. I didn't have much choice at that time. I intend to be an interpreter, and probably at this time I will get the bags and translating everything. But they didn't want me because of my poor English. So I finally fall into the tourism industry. So after so kind, they accept me. And actually my major is heritage management. And they all say the tourism is the enemy of heritage. So of course, I will manage the heritage, and I will know who is my enemy. So that's why I get into the tourism work.
Chuck, do you think that Fiona made a good decision by getting involved in the tourism industry?
What else can I say? I'd be cutting my own throat if I said no. No, I think that given the challenges of the future, the kinds of problems that we have yet to solve, it is a good choice of an industry. First of all, it's a high-growth industry. So if you're looking from a professional standpoint, why would you choose a profession as a profession of the past? This is a profession of both past, present, and future. We're going to see more and more people traveling, but we have a lot of environmental problems to resolve. Ethical issues, sustainability issues. We need the brightest students we can find beyond that thinking. So it's a good choice.
Chris, one of the things that Geoffrey mentioned is the importance of policymakers being aware of tourism. And I know that one of your jobs is you have probably the most NTOs in the PATA region. I think you have 17 in your portfolio. Do you find that people, government officials, that they actually appreciate and understand the dynamics of tourism?
Very often, no. It depends on where you're dealing or who you're dealing with. In the South Pacific, the values of tourism is rapidly being, or starting to be understood. We see in recent weeks that the Prime Minister of Samoa, for example, has taken on the portfolio himself, as he understands the growth in GDP through tourism. We've seen the same happen in New Zealand, with the Prime Minister of New Zealand now taking on the tourism portfolio. So I think the awareness of the value of tourism is now starting to filter through at a much greater rate. And I think this is our opportunity to capitalize on this. Because education comes on many different levels. And I think educating the government on the value of this strengthens the economy that we can drive through tourism is something that we need to seriously consider and act upon.
Brian, you've had a pretty dynamic career in the industry. You've actually done quite well for yourself over the years, from what I read about. And you've been active with PATA throughout that time. Has PATA been a great influencer in the success of your career?
I think it's introduced and exposed me to a lot of people I wouldn't otherwise have met. I mean, I started in PATA when I was 25, something around that age. You know, interesting enough, many of the people I have met there are still with PATA 40 years later. So it does talk about the aging of our industry a little bit, with maybe not responding exactly to the younger people coming through. But I think from an education, going back to the education question, because I remember when I was graduating from school, I was going to go to a hotel school. And my careers master in the school I was in, said, going through all the people who were going to the university here, oh, Decent's going to be a cook. And that was the sort of reaction that people had about what the industry was about and where it is. And, the point I have is it's a global industry. We have all these issues and challenges. Geoffrey just mentioned, I think, about cultural issues and other issues there. But I don't think get addressed in a normal institution. And that's the role I think the party can play, is become that global umbrella organization which can set the agenda for training and for development and education.
Andrew, do you think that PATA is respected enough to actually take on this leadership role that, for example, Brian is talking about, where PATA becomes very, very engaged in education and leads that role? You're in the industry. You're dealing with people on a day-to-day basis. Is it relevant? Do people understand PATA? Do they see that it can take that sort of a leadership role?
I guess it depends on which demographic you're talking about. I certainly see, in the, upper acuity of the industry, the people that are in this room, the people that hold leadership roles, there is certainly that respect and that understanding of content. But if you're looking at the grassroots of the industries and the up-and-comers, they probably don't understand or appreciate PATA well enough to have that respect. Obviously, I see a lot of individuals that come into the industry. And going back to your first point to Fiona about whether it's a good decision to come into the industry or not, I think a better question to ask is it a good decision to stay in the industry? And what I mean by that is I certainly see, I guess, the Generation Y or the youngers coming into the industry, where you're not necessarily losing people to your competitors within the industry, you're actually losing them outside of the industry. So it's a matter of keeping talent Fiona, in the industry over the course of the next 20, 30 years?
Fiona?
I will stay.
You will stay in the industry. Why?
Because after 4 years, I started to like this what I chose at the beginning. And fortunately, I didn't become an interpreter. And I think I'm right. So far.
So tourism is more exciting than being an interpreter?
Yeah. I like traveling. I like interacting with people. I guess I'm in the right industry. That was it.
The idea is patent relevant anymore compared to where it was 20 years ago? And why was it relevant then and perhaps less relevant now?
Well, I think it started to lose some ground of relevancy when, especially when the internet came in. It brought about disintermediation, and therefore PATA was a very effective and very good platform for people to network and be in touch with each other. And there's less, if we don't remain relevant or we don't create opportunities and platforms where people can still find it to be useful, to be in touch with each other with PATA in place, then we will lose totally relevance. Since I represent the course of PATA past, I intend to remain in the present and the progressive future. And I think I like to comment as well on the education part, and something that Geoffrey mentioned, which is that we need to get people into the industry from the time they are in school. They should be thinking about it. Otherwise, we become the employer of last resort. People who can't afford to or can't get a place to be a doctor or a lawyer or engineer say, okay, I'm going to go into tourism. And so we don't do that. We want the guys who could have been doctors, engineers, lawyers, or whatever, who want to come into the industry even when they do in high school. So we need to get them there.
Chuck, do you think that that's a realistic ambition, what TI is suggesting? That tourism actually takes on the luster of being a career choice at an early age?
You know, in many parts of the world, there is a cultural bias against this industry. And I suppose it also reflects my own particular background. Parents in Asia, from Asian culture, think it's okay if you became an engineer, doctor, lawyer, white-collar profession. But if you chose to go into this industry, it was seen as parents failing to do their jobs. And even destinations from that attitude, certainly in Hawaii, we had legislators saying, you know, why do we reorient the industry of busboys and chambermaids? It was perhaps with the growth of the industry, the economic dependence on tourism, and finally more professionalism coming in. You know, let me digress for just 1 second. When Geoffrey Lipman said, education is policy, Fiona needs to be credited for having started the program at the University of Hawaii. And that program is something like 43, 44 years old. Well, the policymakers today are the people that graduate from that school that has a much deeper understanding of what this industry really is. It's far more. And not to denigrate, you know, bed making or busboys, because you can do, you know, there is also professionalism in that. There's dignity in any work. But education sort of redefines that work and gives it a higher level of meaning and understanding of what service, you know, means to both the people that you serve and your community. And so, yes, the answer is yes.
Well, look at Brian. I mean, Brian was going to be a cook, and he ended up being a multimillionaire. Not bad.
I wasn't cook, I wasn't
Andrew, are people looking? I mean, Amitabh was talking earlier. He was talking about the fact that 78% of people are managers and 22% are service workers. In your experience, as you look at the people that are coming into the industry, what kind of jobs are they looking for? Are there people willing to take the production jobs, if you will, and not the management jobs?
Again, I guess it depends on the demographics, or actually the geography of what you're talking about. I guess where I'm based is in Singapore. It's a real challenge in that market to find services, and that's where they have to go and look abroad for foreign workers. So, I guess in developed markets like Singapore, Hong Kong, and even starting to a little bit more now here right here in China, getting the grassroots level roles are becoming increasingly difficult. We're looking at education. A lot of the kids nowadays, or a lot of the Generation Y, are actually very well educated. So, I guess in days gone by, where we're lucky to actually get an undergraduate degree, nowadays I'm seeing a lot of 22, 23-year-olds coming into the industry with MBAs. So they're coming into the industry with MBAs, not necessarily wanting to be a service staff, but their expectation coming into the industry is to come in at a managerial level. And I think that's really been the paradigm shift of the industry and a lot of organisations, where you expect graduates and new entrants into your company, into the industry, to come in at a very grassroots level, be the busboy, be the concierge, be the mailboy, and learn and work your way up the organisation. And nowadays, people are coming into the industry well educated. Expectations are very different to organisations, and I think that's really been, the issue at hand with the industry, which is expectations of organisations and expectations of individuals and candidates.
I mean, Brian, when you first started in the industry, it was basically accepted that you would start at the ground level and you would work for a number of years in various positions until you got to a general manager's position. Why do you think that the whole dynamic has changed there?
There's no question that Andrew's point is 100% correct, because I can see that generation now that are between 30 and 40, they don't want to sit around and be a busboy or work with them. They certainly have expectations are in the senior managers already, and well, they should be.
But can you be a good manager if you haven't actually played those other roles? If you don't know what it's like to be working in the kitchen or working in the front office, are you able to be a good manager at some point?
I always said they don't have to, don't have to boil an egg to be a food and beverage director.
Yeah.
I mean, it's management. We don't sometimes treat it as management. We treat it as craft. I think that's the difference that still happens today. It's all craft schools when I graduated. Now it's universities, degrees, and a much higher level of people. And that's where the industry is driving the industry today, no question. They go back to the Parter point about where Parter is. We have to get the message over what our industry is, what its needs are in terms of people, not that everyone thinks we're training busboys. That's our role.
You look like you want to say something.
Yes, I do. One of the problems, it is kind of a little bit of a problem, that we often do a disservice to our students by telling them that if they finish a bachelor's degree or their MBA or a Master of Science in our program, they're qualified to be a manager right away. And that's not true. You still need experience. Education only a shortcut. We give you the tools to teach you a value system, to teach you how to think, how to analyze, to solve a problem. You've got to find the solutions, and part of the solution comes from your experience. So we say, all theory, no experience, no good. You do need some experience, but you shortcut that by having the right education.
Fiona, do you have any practical experience, or are you one of those people that wants to be streamlined right into management?
I'm used to be the intern with Macau, and I know exactly the difference between a student and the intern. What you learn in school is not actually the one that you apply in the work experience. Even though you're a good student at school, maybe you're not a good worker at the industry. So I really agree with them. The work experience is important, but for myself, I'm still expecting, after graduation, I can engage with managerial level kind of job. But I don't mind really doing stuff from the foundation. That's the reality I understand.
I'm going to ask you another question, Fiona, and then I'm going to ask all of the panelists. So we have this picture of what the travel and tourism industry is going to be like in the future. We understand what young people are expecting from work. How does PATA become relevant in this? What is one thing, and I'll ask each of you, what is the one thing, if there were only a few things that PATA could do that you would recommend that PATA did to gauge into the future and also attract young people to the association and the industry?
Education, or we call it leadership. And I was told that I'm a student here, and during students always challenged my teacher. And today I got the chance to challenge my teachers. So I have to take this chance. However, I agree most of the part of them talking. Like, we really have sort of discrimination on the job of tourism industry. As a high school student, we seldom consider that we will engage in the tourism industry in the future. We prefer lawyers, prefer doctor, accountant, anything except tourism industry. Only when we don't have other choice, we will choose this. So I guess PATA will play the role on promoting like how good we are. Like we should do that this when we're in high school. We need people who really want to do this job, not just they don't have other choice and then they fell into this part. So I guess PATA will do work on this. And not sure all of you play the game, like we call it Golden Line. It's a huge picture, it's all black, and there's somebody like explore all the things. And I guess we're just part of it. This whole picture is all black. We didn't know what's going to happen in the future. We just explore the possible way. So PATA also could explore the way for the education. That's my opinion.
So Fiona's all about education, PATA's role, education. Chris, you've been involved with PATA for 6 or 7 years now. You sell it all the time. You're there. You're advocating it all the time. What if you could sort of clean this? What would you want it to be? What would you want it to do?
Well, first of all, I'll just pick up on what Fiona's saying there. Education and training, of course, got to separate the two. Are very key issues, especially when we see the volume, and the growth, and the rapid change that we're seeing over time now. From PATA's perspective, if it was me, I would give every student studying tourism free membership of this organization. I'd allow them to invest their time in this organization. I would encourage them to use platforms like Tiger, to use our research, our data, and allow them to understand what PATA is, so that when they step out into the world, PATA is already in their veins.
But how can you do that and at the same time grow membership? You have to create revenue. So I mean, you're going to give it as a member, you're going to give it away.
What I was saying is I was picking up on Fiona's point. It's all about business. Everything's about B2B. Everything's about growth. You see this rapid shift in the growth of business in this industry, and that's PATA's role to play, to facilitate it, to enhance that, to make it simpler. We're all very busy people. We all have very busy lives, very busy days. And one of the good things that PATA does, and one of the strengths that we do, is we bring tremendous insight and understanding on not just what's happening now, but potentially and more, what needs to be looked at in the future. If we can make that process simple for the people in this industry, so that when they're busy at their desks and they're working hard, that we can actually allow them to have insight, then we can create direction to grow business, and we can steer business in ways in which we want it to go, including the environment, including youth, including education. So we have a role to play by giving an oversight and insight into what's happening now and where it's going to be. And I think it's a case of re-engaging into the future, and that's what we need to do.
Andrew?
I'd like to, in a way, echo what Chris was saying. But I guess my advice would be to really work out how you're going to engage or re-engage the Generation Ys and the up-and-coming. You talk about giving it away in terms of information and revenue generation. Well, Google gives it away every day. information is freely accessible, it's instant. And, you know, I guess if I look in 5-10 years' time, would a conference like this be applicable or appropriate? Probably not, because, you know, I guess this is obviously important for the network. Gen Y is they network in terms of social media. If I jump on a partner Facebook site as an example, when I last looked at it, there was about 400 friends. If I jump on Tiger Airways Facebook site, it's close to 1 million friends. So that's the difference, and that's, you know, my advice really would be how you're going to engage with the next generation, how you're actually going to make party relevant to them.
Chris, I totally agree with you, because part of what I was saying about engaging with the youth, engaging with students, and giving them a living, it creates a community, it creates dialogue, and it allows us through social networking and through our own interface to understand what they're thinking, where they see themselves in the future. We can pose those questions to them. If we have a small community, we only have a small amount of insight. If we broaden that community, and we start to understand and start to learn from the people who are going to be driving the agenda in the future, that puts us in a very positive space. But we need, it's got to be a two-way traffic.
PI? Well, I guess I have two things. First is what I said earlier about education. And I think partners' role there would be to take some of those best examples from within our membership and also from other countries where governments and education authorities have been able to put together a curriculum and a program to bring tourism studies into the high school, to secondary school. And if we can do that and bring that to those governments and do a lobbying work, and I think that would get some momentum going. The other thing is, we've been doing a lot of good things in the past. We've been advocating, for example, of what is it that makes tourism successful. We say the tourist must be satisfied, the tourism entrepreneur must be satisfied, the local community must be satisfied, the governments must be satisfied. But yesterday I heard someone talk about the tourism happiness index. Our friend there from William Institute, he spoke about the tourism index. And I think if we make it something more cool and bring that to be the tourism happiness index, I think a lot of people will open their eyes again and say, okay, it's not just the old stuff that we've been talking about, it's something more relevant today.
Excuse me. I had an easy answer, but I rethought that just now, that maybe it isn't any one simple approach, but if you want to engage, you know, the future, as Geoffrey points out rightly again, education equals policy, and if you want future members, you're going to have to get younger members, and you're going to have to get the school leavers. I think the thing, you know, that we started many years ago, I think we were the first program to set a HOTA satellite chapter, and Chris Flynn was in the chapter's discussion when Rachel Semone presented what it is that the student chapters did to excite themselves about this profession, a chance to engage and meet with tourism professionals. For me, the key to attracting and retaining people is the word professionalism. Now, if you analyze that question, why is medicine a profession? Why is engineering a profession? But why many people don't see travel and tourism as a profession? A profession actually does have a definition. And there are 10 to 12 criteria that defines what is a profession. It must have its own unique language. It must have its own technologies. It must have its own code of ethics, which is really important. And, you know, listening to the panel this morning, I begin to appreciate how far we are from having developed that code of ethics. Yeah, we talk about ethics, but it's always for somebody else. It's for the responsible traveler, not for the supplier. And so, if Polly could do one thing to bring in young people, it is to sharpen the focus on what is a profession. And if I had a presentation like the one that Geoffrey just made before our Board of Regents, we would probably give a much higher standing to a School of Travel Industry Management. Now, I sit as a regent at the University of Hawaii, and my concerns are far greater than the School of Travel Industry Management. I am concerned about all the STEM industries, science, technology, engineering, math. And the fact that we're ocean, land grant, and sea grant means that we have concerns of dealing with our space, biodiversity of the ocean, of food security. We have all kinds of, and then we raise, but how does travel and tourism resolve that, any of these things, other than enable you to make a living? So if we sharpen the focus on what is a true, to make travel and tourism a true profession through the synergy of organizations like this, I think we would find part of the answer, not all the answer, but part of it.
Well, like a Hippocratic oath for tourism in a sense, wouldn't it be? Brian?
I think just picking up from these fine comments, just trying to see what I've seen. Two things I think were interesting. Chris, I think, had the right idea. He sort of ran scared there, sort of backed off it. But I think he's 100% correct. We have to be accessible. And we have the tools today to do that, as Andrew pointed out. I think that is a fantastic, very simple thing. It's not an expensive thing. It means that we'll have to have the right resources. These students know that they can come to go to our site and find out valuable data they can use in putting their professional things together. Art becomes a very important part of their life. So I think it's a great one, really good. The second one, I think, is Chuck's point. The travel and tourism isn't the industry. This is the problem. There are too many different industries or professions. You've got the hotels, you've got the aviation, you've got tourism, you've got other things. There's no sort of umbrella, and therefore become an industry, become a profession. Sorry, that word, I agree, except you have all these different disparate areas. The person who goes to hotel school, as I did, didn't study travel and tourism. I studied hotel management. And that's, so there is a lot of common ground where we should be studying together, is the point I made earlier. I think that's the key. If we can somehow become that facilitator, so we obviously can't work directly with all the institutions in other countries, but work with the government, education policy. I think if we can get that message across, ARDA will have a great role.
From the audience, comments, questions? Yes? Phil, why? I think yes.
Just a comment on the need to educate. We are as good as our people. If the tourism sector wants to be an employer of choice, I think you need to be able to articulate why a career in the tourism sector is as good, if not better, than that of a legal profession or medical profession. You have to articulate. There's no other way. And one way of doing that is to educate. Not only educating the high school students who would be new entrants into the industry, but also the parents. Now this is Asia. Parents play a big role in shaping how their children think. And to do that, I don't think PATA as an organization can do it on its own. But PATA should make full use of the chapters worldwide, because these chapters are able to reach out to the grassroots in each country. Now chapters can do that role for PATA, and we must not forget that that is the best tool we have worldwide. Thank you.
Geoffrey.
Thanks. I don't want to hog the floor, but there's one kind of theme that's coming around which gives me a little bit of concern. It's this idea that we want to train people to have a career in our sector. I mean, it's a nice idea, but the way the world is working is that actually people are not looking to have careers in any one particular sector. They're looking to move around. And one of the great things about our sector is we are capable of cross-training people in different disciplines, and if we're good enough, And people like Fiona, if we give them enough opportunity, we keep them. And if we're not good enough, they'll go somewhere else. What we have to have as a mindset is that we will also pinch people from other disciplines who are the good ones. That makes us more relevant and more competitive. And just one last point whilst I have the microphone. I think Chris's idea is a great idea to become a repository of first choice where when young kids are searching for things on the internet, they say, I'll go to Pata. Give them that link, but don't make it dull and boring and institutional. Make it sexy. Go to some of the members of PATA who are really the leaders in the online distribution stuff. Mark, who spoke this morning, Jens Trainer, they're all here in PATA, and get them to design an interactive system with the young people that makes them want to go there. And, you know, these guys are good guys and they're my generation, but don't ask them to do it.
Anthony.
This to Chuck G. Now, people go to medical school, they get a medical degree. Go to engineering, they get an engineering degree. So after 4 years or 7 years, you don't run the hospital, you don't run the whole department. I think we got it wrong in tourism. Tourism and hospitality management. You don't have medical management, engineering management. So after 3 to 4 years, they expect to come up and manage hotel and manage tour company. Now, I think we got it wrong. Yeah? Because very often I hear, even from tourism school, they say, I don't expect my staff to start from the bottom. After 4 years, they are managing. Now, Fiona mentioned it. You know, we come up and I listen. I don't mind going down and work from the bottom. But many of the young graduates refuse to dirty their fingers. Now this is a big problem if we call them tourism management staff as they come out. It's like you can do all the degree or study of aviation on flying. Would you allow a person who just come out 5 years, 7 years to fly an aeroplane? No one. But that is the situation. Now Chuck, since you are the academia, how do we go about changing the term?
I think, well, first of all, you really can't change the term too much. If you take the word management out of it, then it won't go, you know, it would never be accepted by a university that this is a university level field. But I do remind people often that travel and tourism is not a discipline, although we do throw the word discipline around a lot. It is not a discipline. It is a field of study. And what we do at the University of Hawaii is that we put in a very strict internship. Well, okay, let me digress just for a moment. Employers come and they will interview students, and once in a while they'll hear students say, well, I want to be a manager. And then they'll complain to me. I said, why do you complain to me? Why do you think they went to college? Of course they want to be a manager. But, I said, they're also smart enough to know they will not get there without the experience. We only provide a shortcut, and we insist on internships. Internships pretty much, incidentally, because the School of Travel and Management has this progressive internship where you go from any job to just get your feet wet to higher level jobs that require some supervisory thinking. What the professors try to do is to harmonize what is done on the field with what's being taught theoretically in the classroom. And if there is areas of debate, that makes a very lively dialogue in the classroom. We learn this in management. Why doesn't it happen in the field? We learn to, that workers are equal to us as human beings, at least. Why do we talk down to them? Then you get the theory of, whether many theories on the subject of human motivation. So it gets into that. We do a survey every other year and ask our graduates, what really did you find was so valuable about education? And invariably, number one answer would be internship. Number two answer were student projects where they work together collaboratively to solve problems. And so they do get that taste of experience, and when they taste the experience, they'll realize how much more they need to know that cannot be learned in the classroom. So you might say that the total education extends beyond the classroom with the profession itself. And then we tell them, and then they understand that, I probably won't be qualified to be a manager until 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And that has also been this kind of our experience. Something that Geoffrey said, I think I want to respond to that for a moment, that in travel and tourism, the field is so broad that there are many, many sub-industries, just as Brian points out. There's an airline industry, there is a distribution, so forth, so on. And if you educate correctly as opposed to training, there's a tremendous amount of mobility. I've had graduates that were very successful moving from one to next. First to work for the public sector in a tourism bureau. Next thing, they went into the hotel industry. Then they decide, well, it's time to be an entrepreneur. Let's open our own restaurant. And that, there's several cases where they end up as being airline executives. But it means that all this experience is cumulative, and each one has value addition in terms of the way you think and the way you solve problems.
Andrew, you wanted to say something? Actually, I wanted to just comment, and this may be a hard one to swallow, but I wanted to say that with the Generation Ys and millennials, don't try and change their mindset. I think the mindset has to be changed, I guess, from the organisations and with the people that's actually in this room. From what I see, and I actually work with a lot of organisations on engagement programs for staff and so forth, is that's actually one area where a lot of companies, they come to me and say, I want to understand Generation Y, I don't understand why they do this or this. How can we make them conform? Well, it's actually not about making them conform, and the change actually starts from the top in that sense.
The gentleman from UNEP.
Thank you very much. I'm listening to you, and in the beginning you asked how many of us were between 30 and 50.
Yes.
And I raised up my hand. But if you make this question now, I will raise my hand when you will say who are more than 75. Because I felt a little bit old. Because I'm listening saying that young people are the way that young people are selecting jobs. And it doesn't make sense for me, because I think that young people do not select jobs because someone will tell them this is what you have to do. I think young people select jobs on three phases. The idealistic one, they say, okay, that's a great thing, I want to do it. The materialistic one, oh, this guy has a Mercedes 500, they say, what is he doing? I want to do the same thing. And finally, they will end up with the realistic one. Okay, I would like to do this, I would like to be a doctor, but when I see blood, I fail. I cannot do it. So I really don't get it how, and excuse me for my expression, if it's ethical to say that the mandate or the objective of an organization is to convince people to work in this sector. I think the question, and that's my question to the panel, is how you can make the tourism industry attractive to the people, to the young people, so the young people can do what Fiona said, select tourism as their first choice and not as one because they don't have other choices. And this is what I would like to listen from this panel. What Pata can do to make tourism industry more attractive for young people?
Fiona, why don't you start appropriately since you're the youngest on the panel?
I will just share with you the experience that I'm choosing the major of my university. As all you know that after we graduate from high school, normally most of students will get into the university. And here we need to choose what kind of job, what kind of major we want to get. And this also will decide what kind of job we want to get in the future. Well, this is time for us to decide what kind of job we're going to do. And which really decide to choose is, are we getting well paid in the future? Is it easy to get us to get a job? Will it be an honored one? Or if you're telling us you'll be a cleaner in the future and it's going to cost thousands of dollars a day, probably not everybody wants to do that. So when we're choosing a job, we're considering the frame, the time, and the pay. So that's what we're considering. And for the tourism, everyone that I approach, they all tell me, are you really wanting to do the tourism industry? You know, it's very tight and can cost a lot of your energy, and if you are not really good paid, that's the reality of the tourism industry now. So maybe that this is the reason that many students are hesitating to get into the industry. So probably it changed. I don't know when will it change. Like my presentation yesterday, if tourism industry personnel, their income is higher than a lawyer, higher than a doctor, much higher than anyone else, I guess everybody will jump, including myself.
Chris, is it Pata's goal to sell the tourism industry as an attractive career path?
Profile and the perception of tourism hasn't changed. It has to change at government level. In China, tourism has been recognized as one of the 5 economic pillars of the future. That sends a clear message to this industry, has a major role to play. I think it's misunderstood and miscommunicated. I think part of the role is to assist in driving the agenda through government. Once governments get it, and once they start to change, and I mentioned 2 examples earlier of the Prime Minister of New Zealand and Semone, once this starts to filter through, then of course it's going to become a major basis of communication, which is going to lift the profile, and the younger generation is going to start to understand exactly what tourism is. Once we get to that point, then the value of the career path will start to change also.
Excuse me, Simon, can I say something?
Yes.
My name is Azizan from Tourism Malaysia. This question of training, education, should not rest on the private sector alone, but also the government. For Tourism Malaysia, Ministry of Tourism Malaysia, we view this very seriously. Last year we got 24.6 million tourists, bringing a revenue of 56.5 billion ringgit. There's about 1 billion ringgit a week. Now the industry is getting recognition from the federal government itself. And we are giving employment to 1.5 million direct employment to the industry. Another 600 to 700,000 is indirect. So if any government would like to really sustain the industry, they have to look at it. This way the Ministry of Tourism works with the Ministry of Education in the country. That's where the policy comes in. Now we have more than a dozen, probably 20 faculties on School of Tourism, Management, providing courses. But what is important is you have to catch them young. So about 6 years ago, the secondary school, that means between grade 7 to 9 in Malaysia, we have more than 40 schools throughout the country. We have what we call a student tourism program. Between 15 to 17 years old. In the school, we set up tourism club. So each year the government gave them a nominal fee for them to travel during the semester break. And we come in and to explain to them about the openings, the platform, the employment opportunities when they grow up. Now, those who has already completed the high school, when they are going to the universities and colleges, they choose to be in the travel line. So that's where because we have to catch them here. And to make it good, I think the Asian Food Channel, AFC, and the TLC, the Travel and Living Channel, really lift up the kind of expectation, and people are so interested to work in the travel line. I think it's where probably the youth PATA chapter, yeah, we have to work on a special program where PATA can come in and help this kind of program so that we can bring this program to an international level. Probably between the PATA chapter members, we can bring students from Malaysia to visit Thailand, and Thailand can visit Malaysia, and so forth. So this is where I think we should be heading towards. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Final comment, yes sir.
Firstly, I'm not a member of PATA, pretty new, but I welcome the discussion here, and the PATA will be more open to have more education to outsiders. So I have one comment and one question. The comment is, I completely agree with a gentleman from Indonesia, education. Education does not only mean to young people, but to the people who are involved in this industry, like government officers, like banks. I work for a local bank here, and we are interested in providing our help in this area, but we need to be active too. We need to know this industry, we need to be confident about that, we need to know how this industry runs. Just one comment. Another question is, how in the Asia Pacific area, which bank is more actively involved in the tourism industry financing, or put it more widely, worldwide? Is there any bank who's specializing or who are more aggressive in providing help in this area? Thank you.
The answer to the question, I can speak from the public sector. There's the Asian Development Bank, which is a development bank supported by developed countries trying to help. I understand. Yeah, but just for the benefit of everybody else, so there's the ADB, and then perhaps I could ask Brian, perhaps you or TI maybe would be the best to answer which bank is most involved in commercial bank is most involved in financing tourism projects.
I'm not aware of any particular bank having
just across the board in general,
independent on the country and organization.
I think that's going to. Do we have time for one more question? Sheila, it's okay? All right. Kevin, go ahead. And then
just
Yanni, right?
On that question that was asked by the gentleman from the bank.
Okay, Kevin.
We work extensively with investors, particularly on the hospitality side of things. The reality is that just as in what we've been talking about today, tourism travel doesn't seem sexy. Within banks, tourism doesn't seem sexy either, and there are no consistent banks on a worldwide basis, or even the larger ones on a regional basis, who give it the time and attention. Where we need to impact on that, and where they need to understand, is that the links with infrastructure is where we can make the connections, whether it's PATA or others, to show them the things that they could be doing better, making financing more sensibly, making financing decisions more sensibly, not just based on relationships, which tends to have been a lot of the situation. At the end of the day, whether they're lending on because the project is worthwhile, because they've got people internally who can qualify that or not, or they've made it because of relationships and then afterwards it goes south, they're still going to turn around and foreclose and create problems. So yes, they need to do it more. Anyone who wants to specialize in the industry needs to look at it for the long term. And it's worth our while as an association to encourage banks to understand this industry better, but you're going to have to go out and teach them.
Yep. Yanni, last question.
Good afternoon to the gentlemen and ladies. This question basically is on the panel. Yesterday, after the new Fiona won this competition, I proposed to Fiona and John. I think this policy here, which the government do have a problem discriminating people who go to school, going to the hotel training school, compared with architect, engineering, and so on and so on. Just an example in Macau. Fiona is a student from China, go to school in Macau, and able to employ her working in Macau. But one of our associates, which is an architect, they can employ a training architect to work in Macau. I think the government should be coming around to have a more open sky policy for the people going to the tourism school, have them at least give them the young people have a overseas training for a year, wherever they want to go, let's say in Singapore or Malaysia or Hong Kong or Macau or the state. I think this kind of open sky policy is just not a private sector to get capable to lobby and get it done. I mean, if we have the partner, if we have some organization like partner, I mean, go ahead and talk to the government, individual government, like the Macau government or Hong Kong, whatever, to try to have this open sky policy allow the student who went to this tourism school, like the team school, that go around to work around the world, get the right experience for a year. I think it's something that, especially in Macau, this little book I picked up yesterday is help wanted in Macau, and then inside the article is boy for the job, you know. So this is the situation is a lot of countries facing, even in China today. So this is what I want to say. If part-time come around, can incapable to lobby all different government, allow the student from all the tourism school to work or to training in the country they wish for a year. I think that would be a good start, good chance for the young people to start their new career.
Thank you, Yan. Well, quite clearly, there is definitely another 60-year future for PATA. There's a lot that PATA can do. And I think I would best summarize it as, I think the word that would come to mind would be awareness. Building awareness among young people of the industry. What is tourism? What are the opportunities in tourism? Build awareness among other sectors, other business sectors, banks, whatever other sectors that you can think of, and also an awareness of bringing all of the various tourism stakeholders together and getting them to work together. The aviation sector, the cruise industry, the hotel industry, the education sector. Maybe we should move away from being such a disparate group of industries and come together, and maybe PATA is what can be the glue to bring all those things together. I want to thank very much the panelists for coming up. I think we've gained a lot from your comments, and I'd also like to thank the audience for many of your very good questions. And I think Marian's coming up now to round things up. Thank you again.